Thanks. Okay, so we have 3 questions on the role of Egyptian Americans, what can they do to help, the role of labor, and the role of Egyptian civil society and parties. Okay. Who would like to go first? Nancy, go ahead.
I'll go first. I'll try to have one answer combining mainly the 2 questions about the role of Egyptian Americans here that they have to play, and also the financing of foreign NGOs. In terms of, there are 2 aspects here. One aspect is about awareness and ideology. One of the problems that I see that we are facing here is that when the international community tries to put pressure on those who are taking over or governing Egypt right now and taking the role of drafting the constitution, and in order to stress on human rights articles, we always find the answer coming and saying, yes, we appreciate that very much, but Egypt has its own specificity and we have our own tradition and culture, and our culture does not allow for that. Of course, this is a very general and vague answer, but it's very difficult to respond to. I think Egyptian Americans have a very important role to play to raise awareness about the importance of having rights and freedom, and also to highlight that there is no sole speaker or anyone who can have a monopoly of deciding what is the tradition and culture of Egypt and how it is defined, and respond to that by having a voice that have the legitimacy to speak on behalf of the Egyptians. On the second issue about the financing, and I'm speaking particularly about the United States. The United States has not changed its way of engaging with the Egyptian before and after the revolution. They are still engaging and mainly talking from government to government. And I think it's about time. There's a huge debate now is like whether to withhold aid in order to pressure human rights and democracy principles, or whether to keep on financing to make this government succeed in its role. But I think we're asking the wrong question, and it's not the matter of whether or not to engage with Egypt and whether or not to provide financing and funding. But the question is how and through which channels. And I think it's very important to have civil society cooperation, and also government to civil society organization, because these are the people who are actually working on the ground. And as long as no matter which government we have in Egypt, if we keep on dealing with just the presidency of the people in power, it will fail to actually proliferate and reach the people on the ground. Thank you.
Anyone else want to tackle the set of questions?
This is on? No. Yeah, I'll leave the legislative questions, the civil society questions, even the Egyptian American questions to others. But let me just say just a couple brief comments about the question about role of labor, and 2 comments. One is that it seems to me that at the level of the macro political process, the unhealthy imbalance that I was talking about had to do with the strong electoral weight of Islamists and the failure of other groups to really be able to build strong electoral constituencies. That's a long-term process. Labor would be an obvious place to go, and my sense is that one of the reasons why I think the Tunisian process might be a little bit healthier is simply because you've got a strong and viable labor movement there that could emerge in Egypt, but it's going to take some time to take what has been a movement that has been growing up under very heavy state control and give a real kind of autonomous voice for workers. There's an awful lot of internal housekeeping that has to take place within the labor movement. The second thing that I would say about that is that for a country that's undergoing revolutionary change for the last year and a half, there's been surprisingly little institutional change and legal change in Egypt up to the present. There's this incredible backlog of all these different groups and sort of a legislative agenda, and the military was actually fairly restrained in what it did in the legal realm, and President Morsi is also he has absolute legal authority according to his own constitutional declaration. The only thing that he needs to pass a law is for him just to say so and write it down on a piece of paper and send it off to the official gazette. It becomes law, and yet he's been very restrained with that. And so there's this whole big legislative agenda that is out there, and a lot of it does involve labor issues. What I would expect is that when the new parliament is finally seated, you will see this kind of backlog of complaints, and every group in Egyptian society kind of rushing to the parliament and trying to rush to the head of the legislative agenda. The days in which Egyptian society kind of presented itself as massed in public squares and with coalesced around central demands, I think may be over. But the kinds of contentious politics that we saw in the years leading up to the Egyptian revolution and the period since then are not over. Egyptians who do not get what they want, where particular constituencies in the society do not get what they want, now have a range of tools in terms of strikes and demonstrations and ways essentially of pushing their agenda. So I would guess that the fact that labor has been kind of a surprisingly silent actor so far may not be a permanent state, and whatever government takes over after the end of this very long and convoluted transition process will come under tremendous pressure, specifically on those kinds of issues.
Go ahead.
On social and economic rights and the role of labor, as Nathan just mentioned, one of the great troubles we've been facing in Egypt in the last almost 2 years by now, is that Egyptian politics and political debates have been pushed right after February 11, 2011, to the realm of identity and identity debating. Be it the reference is to the Islamic identity or to Egypt's true identity. I'm rephrasing slogans which you will find in Egyptian debates. That identity turn of policy and political debates in Egypt has resulted in ignoring real issues on the ground, and some of them led to the revolution of January 25, 2011. Social and economic demands were at the forefront of factors and issues which brought people to Tahrir. In a way, we imposed, and of course the we here refers to the dominant group of actors within the political spectrum, which is the Islamist group of actors. They imposed an identity turn on the debate and led to the marginalization of social economic issues, and even to an engineering of a new political system in which we will have an environment conducive to the democratic transition. In a way, we have spent a great time debating identity as if Egypt was going to rediscover its true religious identity right after the revolution, as if Egypt was going to rediscover where it stands on issues pertaining to principles of Sharia, and as if those issues have not been consensus-based throughout the last years, apart from some groups here and there arguing for a different understanding. Imposing that identity turn on Egyptian politics led to the marginalization of social and economic rights, and the draft constitution reflects that marginalization. It's a copy of the 1971 constitution on labor issues, on education, on healthcare, on social safety networks, even on environmental issues. It's a document which is deprived of any creativity or innovation 4 decades after the 1971 constitution was drafted, and all of that is related to that identity turn which was imposed by Islamists. So in a way, I'm quite reluctant to see what's going on as simply an outcome of labor movements not having enough representation. No, this was a conscious attempt by actors on the ground, by Islamist actors, parties and movements, to impose that identity turn on Egyptian politics and to take us away, to drive the discussion in a different direction than the one which led to the revolution and the one which was present in the different squares in Egypt throughout the 18 days of the revolution. And unfortunately, the major outcome of that distortion, of that distorted political space, is the draft constitution we are looking at and trying to rescue Egypt from its different negative connotations and potential impacts. Thank you.
So let's go to our next round of questions. We'll take 2 here and then 2 there.
Hi, thank you. My name is Isma Yassin. I'm a graduate student at the American University in U.S. Foreign Policy. And I have a more or less of a follow-up question. You had mentioned, Nancy O'Kale, that the U.S. was primarily engaging in its aid and economic policies towards the government, and it still continues to do that. Do you have any specific suggestions for how the U.S. should, in the future, move forward with engaging with the general population, with civil society, and with the public on the ground?
Next question.
My name is Valerie Saturn. I'm a freelance journalist. And I was wondering whether the panel could comment on the growing lawlessness in the Sinai and to what extent this is likely to threaten the stability both of Egypt and the surrounding region. Thank you.
Great. And over here?
My name is Amin Mahmoud with the American-Egyptian Strategic Alliance. And my question to Amr, you was very effective when you was in the parliament, even majority was Islamics. I hope you stay in the Constitution Committee to do the same, and I was pleased with the return of Abdeljalil Mustafa and stay and work within the Constitution. My question is, with the situation we have in Egypt now, what is the best if we can have a temporary constitution to serve Egypt for 2 years, and then we move after that, after we have a stable Egypt than today?
Next question.
Alan Golty from the Wilson Center. In much of the Middle East, minorities are being squeezed out. I'm slightly surprised that no member of the panel has yet referred to the Coptic community in Egypt at all, unless, of course, under the rubric of Professor Brown the Younger, those who do not embrace an Islamist identity. What do the panel think is the outlook for the Coptic community with or without a new constitution? Are we to expect an acceleration of emigration, or will they happily accept second-class status in the new Egypt?
Well, I didn't say Islamist, I said Islamic, just to clarify.
So we have 4 questions, one on civil society for Nancy, one on the lawlessness in the Sinai for no particular person, but Nathan or Amr, would you want to tackle that? No? I'll let you guys decide.
Well, later on, we still have a couple of people standing, so let's take their questions.
All right, let's take the remaining questions, and then we'll have a free-for-all. All right, go ahead.
Hi. My name is Muhammad Ali. I'm a professorial lecturer at American University. And my question for Dr. O'Kale, but let me just start really quickly by one point. The Islamists didn't really win the election 7 times. It's a honeymoon after Mubarak's fall. From 43% in the presidential elections to the real way 25% from 43% to 25% in the presidential elections. My question to Dr. O'Kale, what's really troubling me these days, not really the draft of the Constitution, but certain policy and policy decisions. $5 billion from the IMF without really knowing the plan or knowing the conditions. Speaking about reforming the tax structure without knowing what's going on. The role of civil society in educating people and engaging people in public debates. We see this in Liberation Square, but
what is the question, please?
We need the role of civil society in educating people and engaging people in public debate on the local level and the national level. What role is being played?
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thanks. Amina Fouad with the State Department. Thank you for a really interesting panel. I was wondering if members of the panel could speak to whether internal actors, both new and well-established within Egypt, can be effective in pressuring the Morsi administration towards both a decentralized, accountable government and an open, pluralistic civil environment, and what specifically now needs to be done in both coming months and the next few years to actually realize the aspirations and demands behind the revolution. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question that we'll take.